The Supreme Court is having what can only be described as a consequential week, hearing arguments on whether hundreds of thousands of Haitian and Syrian immigrants can lose their protected status, handing down a landmark ruling on the Voting Rights Act that critics say guts a civil rights cornerstone. And all of this landing the same week, a grand jury indicts former FBI Director James Comey for the second time over an Instagram post many interpreted as a threat against President Trump. These are not routine legal developments. This is the constitutional architecture of the United States being actively rebuilt in real time. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Marcus, let me start with you. Is the Supreme Court doing the country a service this week, or is it dismantling protections that millions of people genuinely depend on?
Thanks, Emma. Look, what the Supreme Court is doing this week is what courts are supposed to do: interpret the law as written, not as activists wish it had been written. Let's start with TPS. The clue is in the name. Temporary Protected Status. The program was created in 1990. Some of these families have been in temporary status for over 30 years. That is not a humanitarian program anymore. That is an unlegislated amnesty scheme operating by bureaucratic inertia. The Trump administration isn't breaking the law by trying to terminate it. It is enforcing the law that Congress passed. Douglas Murray has made this point brilliantly. Western nations have been systematically misled about the permanence of these so-called emergency measures, and anyone who dares to enforce the original terms gets branded a monster. And on the Voting Rights Act ruling, drawing congressional districts by racial composition isn't protecting democracy, it's institutionalizing racial classification. Chief Justice Roberts said years ago that the way to stop discriminating on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. He was right then, and the court is right now. The uncomfortable truth the left won't say out loud is that these programs have been stretched so far beyond their original intent that they bear almost no resemblance to what Congress authorized.
But, Marcus, isn't there a real human cost here? We're talking about people who have built lives, raised American-born children, run businesses, some for literally decades. Doesn't the rule of law have to grapple with that reality? And Sophia, what's your take on this?
Well, look, I'm not going to dismiss the human element, but here's what I think Marcus is missing in his framing. The economic argument for cleaning up the TPS mess is actually more compelling than the purely legal one, and it's the one the administration keeps failing to make. Ken Cuccinelli said it himself on News Nation this week. We don't have systems in place to catch fraud before the fact, at all levels of government. That's not a rounding error. That's a systemic failure that costs taxpayers billions. But here's my frustration with how the Trump administration is handling this. You can't just yank status from 700,000 people without the enforcement infrastructure to manage what comes next. The deportation apparatus doesn't exist at that scale. The immigration courts are already backlogged by years. So the legal victory, and it may well be a legal victory, could produce administrative chaos that actually undermines the broader case for strong immigration enforcement. You win in court, and then you drown in implementation.
I hear what Sophia is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. The fact that we lack the infrastructure to enforce the law is not an argument for not enforcing the law. It's an argument for building the infrastructure, fast. You don't leave a border open because closing it is logistically complicated. You close it and you figure out the logistics. That's what governing actually requires. And frankly, the Comey indictment this week tells you everything you need to know about why this matters so urgently. The former director of the FBI posted imagery depicting 8647, widely understood as a call to eliminate the 47th president, and he wants us to believe he found it by accident on a beach. Come on. The same institutional class that spent years weaponizing federal law enforcement against conservatives is now shocked that accountability might arrive at their door. Ben Shapiro is absolutely right. There is a two-tiered justice system in this country, and dismantling it requires exactly this kind of aggressive prosecution.
Here's what I want to know, because this isn't just about today's rulings. If the court rules for the Trump administration on TPS and the Comey prosecution moves forward simultaneously, are we heading toward genuine institutional reform, Or are we heading toward a constitutional crisis that tears the country apart? Sophia, where do you see this playing out?
The way I see this playing out, and this is the scenario that keeps me up at night from an economic and institutional stability standpoint, is a situation where the administration wins every legal battle and still loses the war. If current trends continue, you get TPS terminated by court order, you get mass deportation proceedings initiated, and then you get an immigration court system that simply cannot process the caseload. The backlog explodes. Cases drag on for years. The political cost mounts, and the narrative shifts from the rule of law prevails to chaos and cruelty. That's not a hypothetical. That's the trajectory based on what Cuccinelli and others are telling us about system readiness. The real risk here is that a legitimate legal and policy victory gets squandered by implementation failure, and the left uses that failure as a weapon in 2026.
Here's what concerns me most, and it goes beyond the TPS case. The Comey indictment is a historic moment, and almost nobody in the mainstream media is treating it that way. A man who ran the FBI, who oversaw politically motivated investigations, who has never been held to account for any of it, is now facing his second federal indictment. If this prosecution succeeds, it sends a message to the entire permanent bureaucratic class that is genuinely unprecedented. But if it fails, if the DOJ overreaches, if the case collapses, if a sympathetic jury in the wrong jurisdiction acquits, then the entire project of institutional accountability gets poisoned. The deep state gets to say, see, it was political all along. That's the scenario that history warns us about. Accountability movements that stumble give their targets exactly the ammunition they need to survive.
Marcus Webb, Sophia Reeves, a genuinely extraordinary week at the Supreme Court, a second Comey indictment, and a constitutional reckoning that is only just beginning. One thing is absolutely certain. James Comey's lawyer isn't sleeping well tonight, and neither, frankly, should the institutions that spent years thinking the rules didn't apply to them.